What happens when you stop living for yourself? The philosophy of Viktor Frankl. What happens when you stop living for yourself? Most people go through life believing that happiness comes from chasing what they want: more success, more pleasure, more comfort. We are told to focus on our goals, to put ourselves first, to always ask, what do I want from life? But what if we have been asking the wrong question all along? What if real meaning, real fulfillment, does not come from serving ourselves, but from serving something greater? And what if the more we focus on our own happiness, the more it slips through our fingers? Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, discovered this truth in the most extreme way imaginable. Trapped in a concentration camp, stripped of everything: his family, his freedom, his dignity, he faced suffering beyond anything most of us can comprehend. Yet, amidst this horror, he noticed something extraordinary. The people who survived were not always the strongest. They were not always the ones with the best health or the most resources. They were the ones who had a reason to live beyond themselves. A loved one they wanted to see again, a mission they needed to complete, and a purpose that gave their suffering meaning. And this is where everything changes. Because if meaning is what keeps people alive in the worst conditions imaginable, then what does that say about the way we live our daily lives? If we feel empty, lost, or unfulfilled, could it be because we are focused on the wrong things? Could it be that happiness is not something we can chase directly, but something that emerges when we dedicate ourselves to something outside of ourselves? Frankl believed this so deeply that he flipped the entire modern mindset on its head. He argued that instead of asking, "What do I want from life?" we should be asking, "What does life want from me?" Think about that for a moment. If you stopped obsessing over what you want and started focusing on what the world needs from you, how would your life change? What task, what mission, what responsibility is calling you right now that you have been ignoring? And what if, by answering that call, you finally found the fulfillment that has eluded you for so long?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Because here is the paradox: the more you live only for yourself, the more meaningless life becomes. The more you focus on your own pleasure, the emptier it feels. But the moment you shift your focus outward toward others, toward a cause, toward something greater than yourself, everything changes. But you stop feeling lost. You stop feeling like life has no direction. Because suddenly there is something to wake up for, something to fight for, something to endure hardship for. And this, Frankl argued, is what makes life worth living. So ask yourself, what are you living for? Is it just for yourself, for your own comfort, for your own fleeting pleasures? Or is there something bigger, something deeper, something that gives your life meaning beyond just chasing what feels good in the moment? And if you do not have an answer yet, what if that is the real reason you feel unfulfilled? What if all this time, the emptiness you have been feeling was not a sign that life has no meaning, but a sign that you have not yet found the thing worth living for? Because here is the truth: you do not find meaning by looking inward. You create meaning by looking outward. And once you understand this, once you stop living only for yourself, you will realize something incredible: you were never lost. You were just asking the wrong question. The trap of self-centered living, why happiness fades when you chase it. Most people believe that if they just focus on themselves enough, they will eventually find happiness. That if they work hard enough, accumulate enough success, or experience enough pleasure, they will finally feel fulfilled. But have you ever noticed that the more you chase happiness directly, the more it seems to slip away? that no matter how much you achieve, how much you own, or how much you indulge, there is always an underlying feeling that something is missing. This is not a coincidence. It is a fundamental truth about human nature, one that Viktor Frankl understood better than most. Frankl argued that happiness is not something that can be pursued head-on. It is not a destination you arrive at by focusing on yourself. Instead, happiness is a byproduct of meaning. It is something that emerges when you dedicate yourself to something beyond your own desires. He saw this firsthand in the concentration camps. The people who clung desperately to their own survival, who thought only of themselves, were often the first to break under the weight of suffering. But those who found a reason to endure, those who had someone to live for, a responsibility they refused to abandon, were the ones who had the greatest resilience. This is where most people go wrong. They believe that if they eliminate suffering from their lives, if they remove discomfort, if they focus only on what makes them feel good, they will finally be happy. But the opposite is true. When life becomes only about yourself, it becomes unbearably empty. Because deep down, we are not designed to live just for ourselves. We are not fulfilled by mere pleasure. We are fulfilled by purpose, and purpose is always found outside of ourselves. Think about the times in your life when you felt the most deeply satisfied. Was it when you were indulging in selfish pleasure? Or was it when you accomplished something difficult, when you helped someone else, when you contributed to something greater than yourself? The moments that give life meaning are not the ones where we take, they are the ones where we give. They are the times when we sacrifice, when we struggle for something important, when we forget ourselves in the pursuit of something greater. But modern society discourages this way of thinking. We are constantly bombarded with messages that tell us to focus on ourselves, our happiness, our goals, our self-care. We are told that life is about maximizing pleasure and minimizing discomfort. But what if this is the very reason so many people feel lost? What if the reason so many people struggle with depression and emptiness is because they have been conditioned to seek meaning in the one place it can never be found, within themselves? Frankl argued that true fulfillment comes when we stop asking, "What do I want from life?" and start asking, "What does life want from me?" This shift in perspective is everything. It removes the burden of trying to manufacture happiness for yourself and replaces it with a mission, something to serve, something to build, something to dedicate yourself to. And the irony is, the moment you stop focusing on your own happiness, the moment you commit to something beyond yourself, that is when true happiness finds you. So ask yourself, what are you living for? If your life feels empty, if you feel lost, could it be because you have made yourself the center of your own universe? What would happen if, instead of focusing on what makes you happy, you focused on how you could make a difference in the lives of others? What if, instead of trying to eliminate suffering from your own life, you embraced the idea that suffering is meaningful when it is endured for the right reasons? Because here is the hard truth that most people do not want to hear. A life spent only in pursuit of personal happiness will never be fulfilling. You can chase pleasure, you can chase comfort, but in the end, those things will leave you feeling just as empty as before. The only way to truly feel alive, the only way to escape the void that so many people feel, is to devote yourself to something bigger than yourself. To serve, to create, to contribute in a way that matters. That is where fulfillment is found. That is where meaning is created. And that is why when you stop living for yourself, you actually start living in the truest sense. So what are you waiting for? What responsibility have you been avoiding? What mission have you been ignoring? What if the thing you have been searching for all along, the thing that will finally make you feel whole, is not something you take, but something you give? The burden of freedom, why responsibility, not pleasure, leads to fulfillment. We live in an age where personal freedom is considered the ultimate goal. The ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with no obligations tying us down. This is the dream, right? To be completely independent, unburdened by responsibility, free to chase only what makes us happy. But if that is true, then why are so many people who have achieved this kind of freedom still deeply unsatisfied? Why do those with all the time, money, and opportunities in the world often feel the most lost? Could it be that the thing we think will make us happy, absolute freedom, is actually the very thing that destroys meaning? Viktor Frankl saw this paradox clearly. He understood that when people are given complete freedom with no sense of purpose, they do not become happier, they become more anxious, more restless, more empty. Because freedom, by itself, means nothing. It is only when we use our freedom to serve something greater than ourselves that life begins to feel meaningful. And yet, modern culture pushes the opposite message. We are told that responsibility is a burden, that duty is something to escape, that obligations hold us back from living fully. But what if responsibility is not what limits us, but what grounds us? What if the weight of responsibility is the very thing that gives our lives direction? Frankl believed that true fulfillment comes not from avoiding responsibility, but from embracing it. That when people feel lost, it is often because they have nothing to dedicate themselves to. No cause, no mission, no higher purpose pulling them forward. And in the absence of this, they fill their time with distractions, temporary pleasures, meaningless entertainment, shallow pursuits that numb the emptiness but never truly fill it. But no amount of pleasure, no amount of self-indulgence can replace the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your life matters, from knowing that you are needed, that your existence serves a purpose beyond yourself. Think about the moments in your life when you felt truly alive. Were they the times when you had no responsibilities, no commitments, no one depending on you? Or were they the times when you were needed, when you were working towards something bigger, when others relied on you, when you were striving toward a goal that required effort and sacrifice? The truth is, meaning is not found in a life of ease. It is found in struggle, in taking on challenges that matter, in carrying burdens that are worth carrying. But here is where most people get stuck. They believe that meaning is something they must find, as if it is hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered. But Frankl argued that meaning is not found, it is created. It is something we build through our actions, through our commitments, through the responsibilities we choose to take on. It is not something that appears when life is easy, but something that emerges when we willingly embrace the difficulties that come with serving something greater than ourselves. So ask yourself, what are you responsible for? What weight are you carrying? And if your life feels empty, could it be because you have spent too much time avoiding responsibility instead of embracing it? What if the fulfillment you are searching for is not in escaping obligations, but in leaning into them? What if happiness is not the goal, but the byproduct of a life spent serving a purpose that truly matters? Because here is the truth. A life without responsibility is not freedom, it is weightlessness. And weightlessness is not liberating, it is unbearable. It is what makes people feel lost, unmoored, drifting without direction. But the moment you take on a responsibility that matters, the moment you commit to something beyond yourself, suddenly everything changes. You are no longer just existing, you are moving towards something. You are no longer aimless, you have direction. And in that direction, in that struggle, in that commitment, you will find what you have been searching for all along. So what will you choose? Will you continue chasing a freedom that leads nowhere? Or will you embrace the weight of responsibility and finally discover what it means to live with purpose? The courage to suffer, how meaning transforms pain into purpose. There is one truth about life that most people spend their entire existence trying to avoid: that suffering is inevitable. No matter how much we try to control our circumstances, no matter how much we chase comfort, no matter how much we attempt to insulate ourselves from hardship, and suffering will find us. People we love will die. Dreams we fought for will crumble. We will face rejection, disappointment, loneliness, and despair. And yet, despite this inescapable reality, most people live in denial of it. They believe that if they make the right choices, if they earn enough money, if they find the perfect relationship, they can somehow escape suffering. But Viktor Frankl discovered something profound, something that changes everything. That suffering, by itself, is meaningless. But suffering with purpose becomes bearable. It becomes fuel. It becomes the very thing that shapes us into who we are meant to be. Frankl saw this in the concentration camps, where suffering was at its most extreme. He saw that those who gave up, who believed their suffering was pointless, were the first to lose their will to live. But those who could find meaning in their suffering, who saw it as a test, as a mission, as something that could be endured for the sake of something greater, were the ones who survived. And if this is true in the darkest conditions imaginable, what does it say about our everyday lives? What does it say about the way we approach our struggles, our pain, our hardships? Could it be that suffering itself is not what destroys us, but the belief that our suffering has no purpose? Could it be that the most important question is not how do I avoid suffering, but how do I make my suffering meaningful? This is where most people go wrong. They believe that happiness is the absence of suffering, so they spend their lives running from pain. They avoid risk, they avoid commitment, they avoid anything that might bring discomfort. But in doing so, they also avoid meaning. Because meaning is always tied to struggle. Anything worth having, deep relationships, meaningful work, personal growth, requires sacrifice. It requires endurance. It requires the willingness to suffer for something greater than yourself. Think about the things in your life that mean the most to you. Did they come easily, or did they require hardship, effort, and perseverance? The truth is, the deeper the meaning, the greater the struggle. And the more we try to eliminate struggle from our lives, the more meaningless our lives become. A life without suffering is not a life, it is an illusion. And when suffering inevitably comes, those who have spent their lives avoiding it will be the least prepared to face it. But what if, instead of fearing suffering, you embraced it? What if you saw your pain not as something to escape, but as something to use? What if, every time you faced hardship, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you asked, "How can I make this suffering meaningful?" What if, instead of seeing struggle as an obstacle, you saw it as an opportunity, a chance to grow, to become stronger, to serve something greater than yourself? Because here is the truth: suffering is inevitable. But meaningless suffering is a choice. If you have to endure pain in this life, and you will then, why not make it count? Why not turn your suffering into something that matters? Why not use it to help others, to build something important, to become the person you were meant to be? Frankl believed that the ultimate freedom, the one thing that can never be taken from us, is our ability to choose how we respond to suffering. No matter what happens to us, No matter how much we lose, we still have control over one thing: the meaning we give to our experiences. And once we realize this, we are no longer victims of our circumstances. We are no longer powerless. We are no longer lost. So ask yourself, what pain are you carrying? And what if, instead of running from it, you transformed it into something meaningful? What if the very thing you think is breaking you is actually the thing that will set you free? Because in the end, the question is not, will you suffer? But will your suffering have purpose? And the answer to that is entirely up to you.